Hello, my American history kids. This is Mr. Kettler here, obviously, and we are going to discuss some of the important events of the civil rights movement. Moving chronologically, we'll start with Brown v. Board and move on from there. But that would have been our next unit if we were all still in class together, and as you've gotten your packet, you would see that that's all about the civil rights movement, so we're just going to expand a little bit more on this topic. All right. So again, like I said, we're going to start with Brown v. Board of Education, which is a very important event that happened in our nation's history because up until before this event, schools were segregated. Okay, and remember, segregation means the splitting of black and white. Okay, and we've already looked at this earlier this year when we did, I believe, the 1920s. We looked at Jim Crow laws, which were segregation laws, and especially down in the South. These were really prevalent. They existed in the North as well. They existed here in Ohio, but in the South, it was very extreme and quite took hold on every aspect of life and society. So, Brown v. Board of Education, you have Chief Justice Earl Warren. Okay, this is something that went all the way to the Supreme Court to try and get rid of segregation in schools. Thurgood Marshall was a guy from the NAACP. Sorry, I cannot talk this morning. NAACP. That is an African American civil rights group that's been around for a very, very long time. They're still around today, fighting for civil rights issues. And you'll generally see them pop in anything civil rights and Supreme Court related. The NAACP is usually involved somehow, some way, one way or another. All right, so what this case does is it struck down Plessy v. Ferguson, which I know we have talked in class before, and just to remind you, Plessy v. Ferguson was the whole separate but equal. Okay, so that actually made segregation okay, right? Under the premise that yes, we're separating ourselves from each other, but we both have equal opportunity, equal schools, equal rights. But as we know, that was not the case, right? The difference between white schools and black schools was quite different. So, in an African American school, you had very crowded classrooms, not as good a quality as school lunches, not as many textbooks, outdated textbooks, things like that. Okay, so there was a stark difference between the two, and it was evident that they were not separate but equal. So under Brown v. Board of Education, we get rid of Plessy v. Ferguson, and that's really the first aspect, an area of society where we are going to try and desegregate the nation. Okay, and they made it a point, you can see with Brown 2 here, that it had to be done with all deliberate speed. Okay, and that's going to cause a big problem down in the South.
We conclude that in the field of public education, the doctrine of separate but equal has no place. Separate educational facilities are inherently unequal. Therefore, we unanimously hold that the plaintiffs are deprived of the equal protection of the laws guaranteed by the 14th Amendment. Plessy v. Ferguson in education is no more, and in practice, Plessy v. Ferguson itself is no more. The era of Jim Crow, constitutionally speaking, is over.
All right, so there you go. So again, while this law specifically addressed segregation in schools, this is constitutionally speaking going to be the end of Jim Crow segregation. There is no longer going to be any constitutional backing of segregation and separate but equal. So this is kind of like in the Cold War we talked about the domino effect, right? If one nation fell to communism, all the surrounding ones would fall. Well, civil rights speaking, Plessy v. Ferguson, Brown v. Board of Education is kind of like that first domino, right? And then once you tip that over, all the other areas of segregation are going to slowly fall as well. And trust me, especially areas like the South, they're not just going to accept this, right? There's going to be a lot of resistance to this change, but eventually they will have to listen. We'll look at how that happened. All right, so reaction to Brown. Like I said, not everybody is going to be okay with desegregating and mixing schools. Okay, and so you can see in the image back here, this is an example of some protests that you would have seen. Okay, so you see the sign, "Stop the race mixing." Race mixing is communist, apparently. Okay, so there we even see back to the Cold War. This is going on during the Cold War, okay? So that's why communism is still kind of relevant here. But I've talked in the past about how, communist was kind of just used as a label on anything people didn't like, right? Segregation doesn't really have anything to do with communism. But, all right. So, the Southern Manifesto, that is when you had 100 Southern congressmen pledged to disobey this new law, right? They straight up said, our states are not going to follow Brown v. Board of Education. We're going to keep our schools segregated. All right, you also had some violent backlash towards this law. I'm sure many of you have heard of Emmett Till, and I believe we've talked about Emmett Till in this class before. All right, but innocent young black teenager who was essentially murdered in cold blood by a few angry white men. Okay, so we still have a lot of racial tension going on in our nation, and especially down in the South during this time. And then there, just to show you really predominantly where a lot of the racial tension and the opposition towards desegregation is in these states down here. Okay, and again, why is it significant that it's these states? Well, this is also where slavery mostly took place before the Civil War. Okay, so the mixing of races has always been a hot topic down in the South. All right, and then this image also shows you from 1954. This is when Brown v. Board was passed, right? All the states are orange, so they're all still segregated. 10 years later, this shows you how many schools were actually desegregating. Okay, and so you can see a good chunk of those states, even 10 years later, still were not integrating their schools, right? Arkansas, Louisiana, and then all the way over up into North Carolina. So they were not doing this with deliberate speed like they were told to. And there's an image of Emmett Till and the gruesome open casket scene that his mother wanted the world to be able to see, to show the world what was going on down in the southern United States. All right, Little Rock. Okay, so this is taking place in Arkansas. Okay, this is a very famous high school, and there's a movie called The Little Rock Nine that if you have not seen yet, does a really good job of explaining what happened at Little Rock High School. All right, but the governor of Arkansas basically refused to allow black students to attend white schools. All right, and so the first really attempt of integrating these schools was at Little Rock High School. So you have 9 black students who were attempting to go to Little Rock High School. Angry mobs of white people, the first couple of days were turning them back. They weren't even able to get into the school. And then this is where you have an example of the federal government stepping in and telling the states what we say goes, right? If the federal government passes a new law, and that's in the Constitution, states have to follow. All right, that's just how American government works. At the end of the day, the federal government more or less has a say, especially on topics like this. So the president is going to send in the National Guard, and basically they are going to escort these students to school every day for quite some time until the angry mobs kind of, it blows over and the mobs just accept it and leave. And then the last thing we see here is that you're going to have what we call a white flight. Okay, this happened in inner cities first, right? When African Americans started moving into, the northern cities, you had a lot of white people that then moved out to the suburbs. And we're also going to see that with schools now. So once schools are now desegregated, you're going to see a lot of white kids leave the public education system and go to private schools. Why is that? Mainly because private schools, they can allow whoever they want to come, right? So if a private school says, no, you can't come here, there's nothing really the government can do about that.
In 1954, the Supreme Court had ordered the integration of all public schools in its famous decision Brown versus the Board of Education. 3 years later, that decision would be severely tested at Little Rock's all-white Central High School. Despite the federal court order, Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus had no intention of allowing black students to attend Central High, and he ordered the Arkansas National Guard to surround the school. On September the 3rd, Melba Bees and 8 other black students walked towards Central High. One, Elizabeth Eckford became separated from her friends and was surrounded by a white mob that included Ann Thompson.
There was just a lot of electricity in the air. It was almost a circus-like atmosphere. All these parents on the sideline urging us on and telling us, get out there, don't let them get in.
There are mobs on her heels, like dogs, nipping at her. Policemen are watching this. Every time she tries to step between them, they close ranks on her.
If Central High was to be integrated, it would have to be by order of the president. Eisenhower was at first reluctant to interfere.
His record on civil rights was not a good one until 1957, in the crisis at Little Rock. And there, a fundamental question was dealt with. Do the states have the right to impose their own social order in defiance of federal court orders? Eisenhower answered it decisively. He said, no, we have made a national commitment. We are going to desegregate this society. And if it takes the 101st Airborne to do it, so be it.
This is awful. That is vivid still. I could just see Little Rock just being in a state of siege by the troops. That was real fear.
Three weeks after the Little Rock Nine were turned away from Central High, they returned, accompanied by troops of the 101st Airborne.
We're all in an Army station wagon, machine gun mounts. It's a pretty heady day. It's not what everybody gets to go to school. You got 1,000 paratroopers, you got helicopters, Jeeps in front, Jeeps behind.
And we stepped out of the Jeep into this square of soldiers who were serious. As I walked up the steps that day at Central High School, I can remember the click of the leather boots on those stairs. And I remember being so impressed by who they were. These are Americans. I'm an American. And so the first time I get the feeling that there is hope, that there is a reason I salute the flag, that this is what America is about.
All right, so there you go, just a first-hand look, actual footage of what went on in Little Rock, Arkansas, and how that was really one of the first steps of the civil rights movement. For sake of time on this video, I'm going to go ahead and end here, and we can pick up with the rest of the civil rights movement next time. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope you're staying safe and healthy, and hopefully get to see you soon. Bye.